things are getting kind of heated in Portland. And I don't just mean that because of the fires and all that kind of stuff. But these so-called protesters are clashing with federal law enforcement on the streets of Portland right now. And it's very interesting to see the responses to it. And just to show you a few headlines here, you have things such as neither side backing down as federal agents and protesters clash in Portland. Conservative media seizes on Portland as burning narrative. Federal officers using tear gas as fire set to Portland courthouse. So there's a lot of different sides essentially to this. You have one group of people essentially saying that these are violent riots breaking out and law enforcement's coming in to stop these violent acts done by these people in the streets. You have another group of people saying that these are largely peaceful protests and the federal government is acting all authoritarian, coming in and, squashing peaceful protesters, for instance, and, arresting them and agitating them, and they're the ones causing the problems. So let's look at what has happened. So this one here talks about how it's, the 53rd night of protests, break-ins, fires, tear gas, or whatever in Portland. Now, all 53 nights haven't necessarily been break-in and fires, but it's the 53rd night of protests, and this is where we're at right now. So federal authorities, again, are using tear gas, flashbangs, and other crowd control munitions against protesters in downtown Portland after the largest crowd the city has seen in recent weeks gathered on Monday night, July 20th, for the 53rd night of consecutive protests against police brutality. So this channel here witnessed protesters and the federal officers face off near Southwest 3rd and Main, saw authorities use pepper balls and throw tear gas canisters and flashbangs. Meanwhile, the Portland police reported on social media that hundreds of protesters had scattered around surrounding streets and were throwing projectiles and were armed with clubs and other weapons. If you've seen the video, it's like shields, any sort of heavy object they can get their hands on to use as a weapon. Portland Police Bureau said the demonstrators attempted to break into the federal courthouse in the early hours of Tuesday morning, prying back the plywood while wearing helmets, gas masks, and shields. The protesters reportedly used crowbars and other tools to penetrate the makeshift wooden exterior, breaking at least one glass window before being rushed by federal officers deploying tear gas once again. Police report several fires were lit outside and around the federal courthouse overnight. Portland Fire and Rescue was required to respond multiple times, and City Hall saw multiple windows broken overnight. It's unclear if any demonstrators were arrested or detained by federal officers. Before federal officers used force against the protesters, a movement of moms and dads drew hundreds of parents dressed in yellow and orange respectively, first to Salmon Street Springs and then to federal courthouses and the neighboring Justice Center. People have been galvanized by the presence of federal officers who were deployed by President Donald Trump to protect federal property and who have had their presence and use of force tactics condemned by local and state leaders. Okay, so that's a summary, essentially, of what has gone on. Now, to catch you up on what led to this night, you've had the protests and the Portland Police Department essentially said that they were backing off and not going to deal with the protesters. They're out, essentially. They're not dealing with this. They're backing off. It's the protesters' ground. So, Trump sends in the federal law enforcement to respond since the state isn't doing anything, and that gets people upset. We'll talk about that in a second. But just to show some kind of on-the-ground reporting, Andy No does a great job of this, and there's some other, reporters you can look at who are getting a lot of video evidence of what's happening. So if you go to his Twitter, you can see they've got videos of these protesters clashing with these rioters, even clashing with the law enforcement. You have them trying to break down the barricades on the federal courthouse. That guy right there, trying to bash in the glass with a fire extinguisher. To continue, you have, them throwing bricks and rocks, them attacking law enforcement, people trying to kick down the barricades, and just a lot of the same stuff like that. Very aggressive, violent, trying to break into the courthouse where the officers are held up. Now, where does that leave us? Like, who's in the right here? Who's in the wrong? So, you have one side, we'll call it the pro-rioter, pro-protester side, again, claiming that it's more of a peaceful protest and that Trump sending in the federal law enforcement is what stirred things up. Here's the thing, people were already getting violent. A lot of times the violent protests happen more in the evening times than the daytimes, and so yes, you do have somewhat peaceful protests during the day. Not all of them, but some of the protests are peaceful, but not all. So we're talking about this specific set of ones that break out in violence, and they're still trying to say no, it's peaceful. And they're saying the only reason it kind of broke into violence is because, Trump sending in the law enforcement or, police stirring things up. So again, to push aside the Trump thing, people were violent at different times before he even sent in federal law enforcement. And then probably part of the reason that the Portland Police Department decided to back off. So people already had a tendency to get violent anyway. But then they pushed this thing forth. You might have seen there's a wall of mom and dads, or a wall of moms, I think was the thing being spread around, that were, peacefully protesting, marching together, this wall of moms to make it look a certain way, like if that holds, it's almost like that was supposed to hold some sort of significant meaning to clarify that it was really peaceful. A mom can be anyone who is a woman, right? So this idea that, this is clearly a peaceful protest and a bunch of innocent people because they're technically moms. It's a bunch of women in yellow shirts who, one, we can't even verify are or are not moms. And even if they are moms, that tells us nothing about their intentions and what they intend to do. People who are moms can be absolute terrible, awful people and still resort to acts of violence to hurt others. I mean, nothing about them being moms really tells you anything about the situation. But again, it's trying to somehow elicit some response from you that shows some sort of sympathy when tear gas gets thrown into the crowd because, oh no, those are moms and dads, right? They're not just young, maybe 20-something Antifa punks with no kids. They're moms and dads who have families and you're hurting them. So that's the idea being put across there, but if you look through some of those videos that have been posted on Twitter there about the groups, some of those same moms and dads are the ones throwing rocks and bricks or handing them to protesters or helping kick down the walls, any of that stuff. They're acting the same as everyone else there. So part of the complaints, too, were that, so let's get to the complaints about the federal officers, right? So they're complaining that federal law enforcement showed up, and that it was really authoritarian of Trump to, send them in and arrest people, put them in unmarked cars or whatever. And that they're trying to, drive them out of Portland now. And it's an interesting idea because ordinarily, if your protests were straight up peaceful, nobody was doing anything violent, and the federal government was showing up, arresting you, putting you into cars, and you don't know what was going on. You were just out there speaking your opinions. Yeah, I would say that's a very scary scenario, and your rights are being violated. You're not doing anything at all, and all of a sudden you're being whisked away by some government power, and you have no idea why. But that is in a situation where everything is completely peaceful. Here, you have a situation where people are, again, looting, burning, rioting, attacking, assaulting others, and it's very violent, and it's scary. And if you looked at, I know Andy No made this point on one of the Twitter videos there I scrolled through, that with the law enforcement coming in, if they are in a marked identified vehicle or state and they're by themselves in that one, they're surrounded and attacked before they can even get done what they're doing. It's almost this problem of they can identify law enforcement before they even engage the people that are the problem, and they're swarmed and can't get their job done. So again, I can see the argument for why you would necessarily be having an unmarked group so that you can actually get done what you need to get done without being swarmed by a group of these protesters. And the reason I'm not so sure that this is as bad as people are making out to be, again, is because these people are being violent. They're dangerous. Other people are at risk of harm here. And Portland, the Portland Police Department, the Portland authorities, said they're not going to be stepping in. They're not going to be protecting people. And you might say, oh, that's all well and good. If the people are protesting and don't want the authorities in the area, okay, authorities can leave, let them resort to violence. That's what they wanted. The problem is that's not what everyone in Portland necessarily wants, okay? The people that are out there doing the protesting, doing the rioting, causing all this trouble, don't necessarily represent everyone in that city. So you have maybe a few thousand, I don't know how many were out there arguing, to get rid of the police, to get rid of law enforcement. And you have many, many more thousand. They may agree, they may disagree, but a lot of them might be scared and in their homes. And you can make the argument, well, they should have stepped up and, defended keeping law enforcement or whatever. But a lot of these people are probably scared because this group that is against law enforcement is so extremely violent and so extremely into canceling people who disagree with them that a lot of people are probably scared to respond or disagree. So then you find yourself at a point where these people who want to commit these evil, awful, terrible acts want to get rid of law enforcement, which is in place to stop people from doing terrible, awful, evil acts to one another. So the people who could also speak up and respond are scared of the people doing terrible, awful, evil acts, and they can't call on the people to protect them because those people have been canceled by the people doing the... You see what I mean? It's like this tough situation that all these people are in. So how do you step in and fix it? You got people who are scared to speak up. You got a local authority who won't step in and stop it. What do you do at that point? Do you say, screw the people who are afraid and let the violence take over and hope they're okay? Or do you say, hey, we're going to stand up for you and protect you and send in a group to stop this? I don't know. What do you think? What do you think is the best option there? I mean, I'm inclined to want to help people that maybe feel scared or defenseless, but, I also don't want people's rights violated. But again, these people that are causing problems are violating other people's rights and breaking the law. So again, there's this picture being painted that the federal government is completely out of line and there's no justification whatsoever. And this is like some dystopian future with an authoritarian government that, violates all your rights and basically kidnaps you in a car never to be seen again. But again, that's not happening with just your peaceful protesters out there holding the sign. It's happening with your guy in a mask with a fire extinguisher beating down a building trying to light it on fire with federal officers inside. The government being a completely evil entity here, sending in federal law enforcement to respond. I think there's some good justifications to respond. I mean, if your local authorities won't protect you, those people there that need protection, someone's got to do something. But to move on from that, maybe something a little light to end on, to not focus on all this depressing, violence and protesting going on. We have this. The naked protester flashing police in Portland the other night. Now, if there's nothing shown here, it's, blacked out in certain parts, but if it still bothers you to see even like the black bars across somebody there, then you might want to turn off. But so as protesters continue in the U.S. over the death of George Floyd, one woman has gone viral after she put on a confronting display in front of police. Footage of the woman, who remains unidentified, shows her wearing nothing but a mask and a beanie as she sits on the ground with her legs apart. In a video posted to Twitter, the naked protester from Portland in the city of Oregon was seen walking along the sidewalk Friday before laying down the road, kicking up her feet, and doing yoga and ballet poses. I think she did this for about 15 minutes and basically sat there and flashed the police. Don't know what this accomplished other than giving the officers there a show. I don't know if that's supposed to antagonize them or upset them. I don't see why it would. But I find it funny that if you think about it, can you imagine if a man did this? What the response would be? How that is, especially if it was a man in front of a group of women like you. Flip the scenario there. It'd probably be sexual harassment, right? People would be very offended and upset. But this, I guess, is being portrayed as some form of artful protest. I'm sure she got a lot of attention for that. But just to show you how odd and strange some people are in the midst of all this, we have violence and all kinds of crazy things happening, and one person feels the need to completely strip down in the nude, sit on a dirty roadside next to a manhole cover, and flash their entire, self in front of a police department while pepper bullets are being fired off. Such weird times. Anyway, thank you guys for tuning in for this segment. If you liked it, be sure to leave a like. Helps with the algorithm, get the videos out there. Subscribe, you'll be notified when we come out with new stuff. And other than that, you guys have a good one. Stay safe out there if you're in Portland. Be extra safe or anywhere this stuff's going on. We will see you next time. You guys have a good one.